for those that don't know, maybe some of my younger audience, Sammy Davis Jr., part of his career, he spent alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, right? Collective group known as the Rat Pack. Had a ton of success in Las Vegas and touring and all of that good stuff. A complicated relationship with Frank Sinatra in particular. I mean, do you think that's a fair description of describing their relationship?
Yeah, I think it was. I think that was very fair, but it was more about Sinatra than it was about Sammy. So, I'm sure, Sammy died 30 years ago, so I'm sure there's a lot of your audience, a lot of people in your audience that may not just be familiar with him.
Right.
My kids are in their 20s and they don't have a clue. But he was arguably the greatest entertainer of the 20th century, who could do everything. He could sing, he could dance, he could act. Just look him up on YouTube. And
Yep.
He was just absolutely remarkable. Him and Sinatra go back. They first met in the 1940s. They passed each other, and Sammy was a big fan of his, and so that relationship was such where you had a relationship with Frank Sinatra, but it was on his terms. So he was the leader. He had a group of guys that followed him: Sammy, Peter Lawford, Dean Martin, and as long as you did that, then you were the greatest of friends. Towards the latter part of their relationship, Frank cut him off because Sammy had gotten involved with cocaine and some other crazy stuff in the 1970s, including dabbling a little bit in Satanism.
Mm-hmm.
And then back in the 1980s, though, they had they were back together again, but it wasn't kind of like a full partnership. They did this big tour in the late 1980s, which was the thrust of it was to help Sammy get out of debt. Unfortunately for Sammy, Sinatra got the lion's share of the proceeds, and Sammy got, as I describe in the book, he got a contracted rate.
Right.
So he didn't make as much money as he thought he was going to make. And Sinatra's people were making a ton of money off the sale of T-shirts and other merchandise and stuff like that. So it wasn't, at the end, it wasn't the kind of relationship or an equal relationship, put it that way. But it was one that Sammy, at the end of the day, he did cherish. They had been friends for a long time, and it was to a large extent Sinatra had opened some doors for him. He had also closed some doors too when it came to early 1960s and the Kennedys,
Mm-hmm.
which I write about in the book. But it was a fruitful relationship between the two of them.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, two phenomenal individuals. For those of you, again, you can YouTube. And as a matter of fact, actually, there's an amazing documentary on Netflix, and I'll post the name. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head right now, but I'll post the name that's about Frank Sinatra, his life from beginning to end. That's on Netflix. And then there's also a documentary about Sammy Davis Jr. that's on Amazon Prime. So I'll share that information now. You mentioned something, Matt, and I got to go back to it, man, because this is pretty heavy stuff, especially for Black folks, because we're terrified of Satan and the devil. And then you start mentioning the devil and stuff, shit, man, we get pretty nervous. But I read it first, or I learned about it first in your book. Okay, first. Second, I'll say I got confirmation of it because, Jerry Seinfeld has the show Riding in Cars with Comedians or whatever, right? It's on Netflix. He had Eddie Murphy on the show. I don't know if you saw this, Matt.
I saw it, yeah.
You saw it. So out of Eddie Murphy's mouth, he said, right, meeting Sammy Davis Jr. was cool until Sammy said, hey, man, you should look into worshiping Satan. And I'm paraphrasing here. It's not exact words, but he said it. So it gave me confirmation. I was like, oh my gosh. So you touch on it multiple times throughout the book. You never go into a lot of detail, but you do mention it multiple times to where there's enough there to say, hey, there's something here. So my question to you is, the occult, devil worshiping, did Sammy dabble in this, or was he drenched in it?
I'd say he dabbled. I don't necessarily think he was drenched. Sammy, we'll use that word, he was a dabbler.
Okay.
I mean, he had an open mind. I mean, you're talking
Yeah.
about a guy who converted to Judaism
Right.
in the 1950s. You're talking about a man who married a white woman in 1960, which, you know, you're talking about a country where I think that was against the law in half the states.
Yes.
You know, and it prevented him from attending the Kennedy inauguration, which was a huge disappointment from him. So, you know, he would go into different directions that he may not be the mainstream. And, you know, the whole devil, he ran into this guy up in San Francisco who was, you know, part of a coven up there. And he ran, you know, California, I forgot the name of it, but just some devil worshiping group, you know. And
Yeah.
Sammy, this was a period mostly in the 1970s, and he was, you know, he was using a lot of cocaine at that time. And he was just experimenting a lot and doing a lot of things, and, you know, kind of really threw off his close friends. Like I mentioned Sinatra before, you know,
Yeah.
Sinatra cut him off for like 10 years or so. It was something he definitely dabbled in.
Hmm.
I don't think he was drenched in it. Maybe he was leaving a little bit more serious than dabbling.